Hello there. You are listening to KPCA-LP in Petaluma, California, 103.3 FM, and you can always live stream at kpca.fm. You are here live with DG the 30-something on the State of the Union radio show. I am very lucky today to be in studio with Lulabel Seitz, who will be telling us the true story about what happened during her valedictorian speech when it was cut. She is, if you are not from the area, she goes to Petaluma High School. My crosstown rival is a Casa Grande graduate, and she was a valedictorian, and her speech was cut midway. So I am very excited to have her here. But before we get into introduction, you can see her there if you're on video. So I did want to start, though, by playing the entire speech that was cut, and then we'll kind of get into a lot more of the conversation, what happened there. So I'm going to start by listening to that, and so here we go.
Hi, so I'm Lulabel Seitz, the senior class of 2018 valedictorian at Petaluma High School. As many of you saw, the administration unfairly cut off my mic, and even when my class stood up to say that I should speak, they still did not let me finish my speech. So here is the whole speech, uncensored. I could not be more pleased to be here today. I remember our first day here as freshmen. The hallways, which inevitably smelled bad, were somehow special. And PE uniforms were a nuisance, but somehow a source of pride. And shopping for school supplies was boring, but somehow significant. We can't deny that it was with an air of importance that we all walked in here, formerly scared junior high students, and now freshmen, so grown up. And we all walked in here with big dreams, whether those dreams were going to a certain college or going to a certain party. Standing before you as I am now was my dream, though it was by all means an unlikely dream. As the granddaughter of two grandparents who were immigrants from the Philippines, one single mom, and the daughter of two parents who left high school early and didn't get to go to college, I didn't think I'd be standing here as your valedictorian. But the reason I share this story with you is not because I think it's unique. No, in fact, quite the opposite. We have all had unlikely dreams and overcome obstacles in order to achieve them. Because adversity isn't the rare, monumental idea we made it out to be in our freshman year English essays. No, it's something incredibly common that we've all experienced throughout high school. We've all at some point or another been hurt, excluded, or worst of all, ignored. But it is not the fact that we've had these experiences that is the reason we are here today. Rather, it is the fact that we've overcome them. And perhaps we haven't all achieved our unlikely dreams to the extent we had hoped. But we're all here today, and we're graduating. For many of us, that itself was the unlikely dream. For all of us, that is something we deserve to be proud of. In Latin, valedictorian means farewell sayer, but it's always difficult to say goodbye, especially knowing that we won't all remember each other. But each one of us has made a significant impact on another one of us in such a way that our class as a whole cannot be forgotten. Furthermore, it is the journey the class of 2018 took to get here that distinguishes us from our predecessors. The fires, which caused all of us to miss school and many of us to lose our homes, we didn't let that drag us down. When our teachers had to go on strike because some people didn't give them the respect or the contracts they deserve, we didn't let that drag us down. And it helps that we have had the support of so many compassionate and dedicated teachers, parents, family members, friends, staff, counselors, custodians, librarians, lunch ladies, to get us to where we are today. And even learning on a campus in which some people defend perpetrators of sexual assault and silence their victims, we didn't let that drag us down. The class of 2018 has demonstrated time and time again that we may be a new generation, but we are not too young to speak up, to dream and to create change. Which is why even after 4 years of working our hardest and becoming the highest achieving class that Petaluma High School has ever seen, and some people told us that our love of learning, music, art, anything was not worthy or valuable enough to be funded, we didn't let that drag us down either. We are strong. So yeah, we won't be forgotten. How could we be?
Alrighty, well, so now I have to follow that speech with myself. So I wanted to start, I know I have a lot of new listeners that are tuning in exclusively for this show. So I wanted to start by reminding people, if you just tuned in, I'm here in studio with Lulabel, whose speech just ended. And I am going to start with myself, because like I said, I have a lot of people that I know are just tuning in for the show and will be tuning in the future for shows. So I am a longtime Petaluma resident. I am a Casa girl, and I am very passionate about the city and things that go on. So I'm very happy to have the current leaders, I never like to call the youth the future leaders, the current leaders of the world right here. They have our answers. And so that's who I am. And if you do not know that State of the Union is my show, been here for about a year and a half. And we are continuing the cause. I'm so happy to not be in the studio by myself for the first time in a long time. So I am going to start by letting my guest give a little bit of background information about herself. You heard her speech, but we want to kind of dive into a little bit more of what got you to that point.
Hi, so I'm Lulabel Seitz. I'm going to go to Stanford University next year and study applied mathematics and economics.
Wow.
So yeah, I was the valedictorian of Petaluma High School, and my microphone got cut off. In all of my years of Petaluma High School, I'd been really involved. I was the student body treasurer. I was in student government all 4 years. I was in band. I did all the trumpet solos. I did space experiments and everything. So I really saw everything that was going on at the school. And then at the end of the fall semester of my senior year, I was sexually assaulted by another student. And the reason really that I included that in the list of tribulations that my class experienced in my speech was because since I've seen so much of what goes on around campus, I saw that other girls had the exact same experience I did and the exact same poor response from the school. So I felt it was necessary to include that.
Well, and that's really powerful. And I've mentioned on my show before that I went through the same exact experience when I was 15. I was sexually assaulted, and actually I didn't even feel empowered enough to even address the issue. I didn't even realize until many years later. So there's something really, you know, as much as the school didn't address it properly, there's something really unique in that experience that it was addressed early. However, it is a very common issue, and that's why I'm so disappointed that it wasn't, you know, received well, that that's how it's supposed to be, like that's an issue. So I'm also really interested in hearing kind of the course, and there's been a lot of stories and speculations of why the speech was cut or what happened or all that. So I just want to hear firsthand kind of the calendar of events and what that, I don't really know what it looks like to be valedictorian, developing a speech. So if you could walk us through kind of what that, formality is and then how everything happened, that'd be great.
Yeah, so normally when you're valedictorian, you're announced as valedictorian at the very beginning of the spring semester, and then you have that point up until graduation to prepare your speech. So I was announced as valedictorian at the beginning of the spring semester, which is after the whole sexual assault thing happened, and at that point, it was sort of a battle between me and the school to try to get the perpetrator off campus, because I was afraid to be at school with him. So anyway, I was announced valedictorian, and then the unusual thing was this year, they had everyone audition for the valedictorian speech. So obviously, when I submitted my draft of the speech into the audition pool, I couldn't put in the part about sexual assault, because prior to that, they had specifically told me if I was to get a speech, it could not include any mention of sexual assault. So
can I ask you a really quick question before? So that's really interesting. So generally valedictorians chosen based on your standing in the class. So they was it everyone was in a tie and they had like an audition, or was it just a spectrum of scores they had?
So no, so it's calculated by your GPA over all 4 years. And I actually ended up taking a lot of math classes at the community college because I just really like math. So that put me over. So I was kind of by far the valedictorian. It's just for a long time my principal had been wanting to make auditions because he doesn't have confidence that whoever is valedictorian will actually give a good speech, even though I had just won a bunch of public speaking contests. So he wanted me to audition.
So was it you and several other people, or just you to see how you'd react in that audition?
So for the audition, a lot of people had to submit the drafts of their speech, and then I submitted my draft, but then I went to the principal. I was like, this is really not fair. Like, I still think I would get the speech with the audition, but I just thought it wasn't fair because it wasn't only me. He also made the student body president audition, who was my friend, same with the senior class president. So he just had everybody audition, which was really strange. But anyway, I ended up getting the speech.
So that's really interesting. That's part of the story. When I was in high school, obviously it wasn't that way, and I find it really bizarre. I mean, I could definitely understand if you wanted to work with someone, perhaps to kind of help them strengthen their public speaking skills. But I've actually never seen a valedictorian struggle in a speech before. But okay, so that's really interesting. So you had to audition for your speech, and then, which is weird, to say the least. But then, so what happened from that point? So you auditioned with a certain speech that you submitted. Were you in front of a panel of people?
I don't know how it worked. We just had to email our speeches, and then they supposedly read them and then contacted us.
Oh, so they were just screening the content. They weren't even screening what you were saying. So it wasn't really that's interesting. Okay. So then from that point, where did it go?
So then we started having practices, me and the other speakers. There were a lot less speakers than before, and normally valedictorians, they said this was not true, but I looked at the past videos, they would get 6 minutes to speak, and they gave me 3. So that was interesting too. So it was just all this chaos. And then, so eventually what happened was they started pulling me out of class just to remind me not to mention sexual assault specifically in my speech.
Wow. Well, and I guess, we can see a lot of issues with that, but how in that moment did that make you feel about having to then go do this speech, feeling that there was part of it that they wanted to censor?
It was difficult because the day before graduation, they pulled me out of my last class of high school, which was actually, I was taking a final, and they pulled me out of class. And they started yelling at me, and they said, a student, who I later found out was an ex-boyfriend of mine, said that you may go off script, and they're like making all these thinly veiled threats. So it was a lot of pressure, and I almost didn't do it, but I ended up doing it anyway.
Well, I think many of us will agree that we're happy that you did that, and that's a really interesting story. And I actually didn't. I've heard all the rumors that I think everyone else has heard, and I actually didn't look into it any further because I wanted to hear it straight from the source. So that's really interesting. And then, and again, I was a victim of sexual assault, but I didn't actually even address it at all in high school. So it's kind of interesting to see how that panned out for you in that situation. So through all those threats that they kept making to you, basically when you did go up and do the speech, you kept in that one line. So is that kind of why the mic was cut, in your opinion?
Yeah, because what they told the news, which is a lie, is that whenever I went off script, they would just cut it if I went a word off script. But my script actually wasn't on the podium, so I did that whole thing from memory, and I went off script way before they actually cut it. I went off script maybe in the second paragraph. So they did just cut it once they heard some people, which I guess they thought referred to them.
So it was, that specific reference. That was kind of the off script. Yeah, that's the main story I think most people heard, is that you had to submit what I heard was that you had to submit your speech to administration, and then you basically signed a contract that if you went off script, that they were allowed to cut your mic. Yeah. So that's kind of the rumor that's going around.
Yeah, so there was absolutely no contract, and but people also don't know this. It's actually in the California Educational Code that you're not allowed to censor valedictorian speech for its content. So they were not allowed to pull me out of class to do those things. Yeah, it was interesting how that played out.
Well, and it seems really disruptive to your senior year after everything you've already gone through, and now you have this school kind of pressuring you to deal with one thing one way or the other. So why do you think, in broad terms, what do you think their intention was in trying to censor that piece of information?
Well, they told me before this year, they told me our jobs are on the line, so don't talk about how we handled this case. They said that. So I'm assuming, again, their jobs were on the line. They didn't want parents to know that they defend perpetrators of sexual assault, and so they just cut it off.
Wow, okay. Well, that is really interesting. I'm going to take a look down really quick because I do accept questions on my Facebook page, so I want to make sure that I have that up. Okay. So that's really interesting. I mean, that is a whole other side of the story that I'm shocked because, and we talked a little bit about this prior to the show about how I haven't seen a whole lot of change in Petaluma since I was in high school, and it sounds like issues are actually being addressed even worse than when I was in high school, which is really, I mean, it's a spectrum, because when I was in high school, girls didn't feel comfortable even expressing that this had occurred, and so it's really disheartening to me now that when girls are saying this occurred, it's like, you're not allowed to talk about it. You're not allowed to address this. You're not allowed to talk about it. It didn't happen. As far as we're concerned, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And so I guess one of the first questions I have is obviously the school, and I almost left high school because I was bullied really heavily and everything that happened to me, so I almost left high school. But my question to you is kind of how your broader support network, like, what did that look like when you were going through that? And I feel like, as a kid, I'm 32 years old, and people still treat me like a child. I feel like a lot of people look at it and like, oh, you're just making it up. So I'm just curious to know, outside of that school context, what like the broader context looked like for you in that time.
It was interesting. I was lucky in that I have good relationships with the people in my senior class, so they did all believe me and what I said. But with the school, they really were different. One counselor told me once that they were considering having me move to CASA in order to not disrupt the learning process for me and the perpetrator, which is very unfair. He didn't even get moved to CASA, so I don't know why I would get moved to CASA.
Right.
They treated me really badly, and I feel even it's more unfair because I was allowed to stay because I got my Stanford acceptance letter in the mail. All the other girls who have contacted me after from my school said they left high school or they went to the other high school, which is terrible.
Yeah, I do think that's a common, even if it isn't, forced by the school, I feel like it's this common thing that, me as a woman, I feel like it's like, okay, well, I have to make the change as opposed to actually addressing the issue. So I hear you on that one. And so I guess the next thing I would like to ask is, where do we go from here? We're coming up on an election season. We have the mayor seat up. We have council seat ups. We have school board seats up. I know this is like a super complex question, but someone that's coming right out, I had quite the agenda when I came out of high school, but I went away to college as well. But I know you'll have that attachment to Petaluma. What do you think some of the solutions are, and how are those obtained? Is it through, changing who's in office? Is it, how do you really see going through this experience and now graduating high school, like, how can Petaluma move toward change? And, like, what do those steps look like?
Well, obviously the scope of things at Petaluma is pretty small and we need change on a bigger scale, but I think we need to start with Petaluma here, and I think we can actually set an example because there's been so much news coverage. I've been really disheartened because the school doesn't want to change. I was sent from an anonymous source a video that included school board officials making fun of me after this incident, and I was set up with a meeting that seemed kind of fishy for them to quote-unquote investigate my complaints. I don't think they're changing, and I think that everybody who's listening needs to tell the school board they need to change or else their seats are up for a new replacement in November.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree it starts with the school board, and I'm just wondering, we live in this very interesting culture in Petaluma, which indicates a lot of activity and involvement and progress, and yet we keep hearing the same stories that have been occurring. You know, I've lived off and on in Petaluma for 24 years. So I know, I know it starts with the school board, and you did say it starts with Petaluma, but it's a broader issue. So what do you think some of the steps are that we can take, especially starting at a much younger age? It shouldn't be when women are in their 40s and they're addressing this culture change. Like, how do we appeal and help women feel empowered to work towards change at a national level, changing the culture? I do think you can start in Petaluma. Like, how do we start addressing that issue?
Well, I think there's a few different avenues, and I've thought about this a lot, that people take. So one is the whole spreading awareness with hashtag #MeToo and everything. That doesn't always work because now we have male politicians going around saying, I'm scared to be in a room with a woman in a workplace. It's like you shouldn't be scared if you're not a harasser. So that avenue doesn't seem to be working very well. So then the other avenue is we can go for legal change. So perhaps if everybody who has been mistreated and their institutions haven't followed Title IX, perhaps if they put together some sort of class action lawsuit or something and it goes far enough, it can be some sort of legal statute on par with like Brown versus Board or something like that.
Okay, and then do you have any ideas? I know there's something like the legal avenues and all of that kind of stuff, but how do you feel in a day-to-day culture change arena that, these kind of issues can be addressed? I mean, there's those very grandiose, and I agree with both sides of those, and I totally agree that the Me Too movement it was very powerful, but it's also been very watered down by this backlash that all of a sudden that, I'm scared to be working with a woman because something might come back to me. So, I mean, do you have any ideas about how, or maybe not even about how to address the culture change, but I'm sure you've been approached by many women after this occurred, and kind of what you tell them and how you encourage them to move forward and, kind of what this change looks like in, a very broad way.
So this issue for me is about accountability. So there are always going to be bad people, and there are always going to be people who harass other people, rape other people, do this sort of thing. So what we need to do is hold the people in power over those people accountable for keeping those people in check, and then that's how we can reach the bigger change.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And like I said, there's so many women that don't have that voice, and so it's always really powerful. We can elevate, that voice. So I'm not sure if there's anything else you wanted to add about kind of like that culture piece, or if you have, any words to share with women that might be going through this. And you've kind of brought to light how there is this system that you have to fight against, and when you're in a public school, you're kind of stuck there. Mm-hmm. And there's not a whole lot of leeway to go other places necessarily. So I guess maybe what you would recommend for girls, women that are in that situation, and how they can act without feeling like there's going to be retaliation. I think that's usually the biggest fear, is retaliation.
Well, I would say, and this isn't very optimistic, but it's gonna suck. Like, when I told the school, some of them didn't believe me, even though they had no reason to doubt my honesty. So it's gonna suck, but you have to think long term. Like, if you don't want your daughters to experience this, if you don't want your granddaughters to experience this, then you have to speak up, because then it gets on the record. And if we see how many are on the record, then people actually want to change the record.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. We know the national statistics about how common it is, and I just think that the unfortunate thing now is it's gone all the way to the other spectrum, where people are like, well, it's going to happen to me. Women are like, it's going to happen to one of three of us in this room, and if we're in certain communities, it's way more likely than others. So it's just going to happen, and that's a really unfortunate situation that we're in as women. I went through it. I know many other women that went through it. I couldn't talk about it until I was in my mid-20s. So I think it's a really a powerful thing to empower women to, even if you're not willing to come out and say this happened, but to start that process of being like, okay, this wasn't, because I think there's a lot of denial.
Yeah.
For me, there's a lot of denial that went into it. It was like, oh no, that wouldn't happen to me, like, I'm fine. There's like this whole denial response, and so it took me many years to be like, oh no, that was not okay, it wasn't warranted, it wasn't any of that kind of stuff. So past that point, so we've definitely talked about the reason that we think why it probably was cut. I don't want to say think or not, I'm not in your shoes. I don't agree with what happened either way. And so one of the questions, so usually when I do my radio shows, I talk to a lot of people because I want to hear what their perspective is. So one of the main arguments I got was that, yeah, it's great that she was able to voice her opinion, but that wasn't the proper place.
Yep.
And so I kind of want to hear your response to someone saying, well, you shouldn't have done it there. You should have done it somewhere else.
Well, so there are a few obvious avenues for your complaint. One is the principal's office, check. One is in student government, check. One is to other students, check. I did public speaking things that, I included sort of these aspects into my speech for public speaking competitions. So I feel like all of these quote-unquote appropriate avenues, I actually went to those first. And then I think these people really need to put themselves in my shoes. Like, this is my last moment at high school. Lots of people had asked me to speak up in this particular place. Like, what am I going to do? Am I going to just give in and hope, like, to speak somewhere else? And then also some people say I should speak at, like, anti-sexual harassment events. Well, if you speak to a room full of people who are already agreeing with you, you're not changing anyone's mind about the issue.
And I highly agree with that. You cannot, when you're preaching to the choir, they already all agree with you. There's no point, and it's not there's no point, but you got to be able to communicate with people that don't necessarily see eye to eye. And I do think there is something, even with the people that say, like, oh, they should have done it. She should have done it in a different way. It's like, well, what way then? What way is that?
Yeah.
What's more appropriate? I guess, you weren't swearing, you weren't being derogatory, you weren't saying names, you weren't doing anything like that. So, and I agree. I think that any avenue there is to go is go. So, my next question, kind of not really in closing, close closing, is that, so given this experience, you said you're going to Stanford, you are super into math. This is a super unrelated math issue, social issue. So I was kind of curious, through this experience, how, especially with everything that just happened at Stanford, was that like 2 years, was that already 2 years ago, a year and a half ago?
Something like that.
I'm just curious to know how you're going to take your experience here through with you, and I ask that because I've written a lot of blogs and my personal experience and talking about being, one of my first courses in the business department at UC Santa Barbara. There was, I think there was 2 girls and 20 guys in a micro econ theory class. And again, I'm 32, so we're not talking about 50 years ago. We're talking about not that long ago. So given that you're in still a male-dominated field, how are you going to take your experience on with you when you move on to Stanford?
Yeah, so I've always been, like, all my math classes at the college, I'm usually one of the only girls, if not the only girl. So I'm really used to it, and frankly, like, I don't think anything bad about men. I don't mind being in a male-dominated field. Um, like, they can be my friends too. Like, I have no issue with that. One thing is, like, I don't really consider myself, like, a victim of sexual assault, or even, I wouldn't use the word survivor. I just think I'm an experiencer. Like, this is something that happened, and now I move forward and try to make it so other people don't have this experience.
Well, yeah, and thank you for saying that, because I've always struggled with, I'm not a victim, I'm not a survivor, I'm a human that went through something, and it caused a response, and, you know, that memory's not going to go away, but it also doesn't mean that, you know, and again, everyone responds very differently to things.
Yeah.
So that's good to know. And then, you know, we didn't even get into, what are you going to do after you finish college? What is your life plan here?
Well,
it's going to change, don't worry, for now.
My life plan had always been to be a math professor, upper division mathematics. But now I'm really considering, like, civil rights law, because I found that I'm good at knowing the law, and I'm pretty good at arguing the law. So, and I like helping people, so professor, lawyer, we'll see.
Hey, you know, you could do either. I'm considering applying to law school now. I'm 32 years old. Why not? I'm good at it. So that's always good. Well, that's awesome. So I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add kind of about the whole situation, if there's any other messages you wanted to get out about.
Well, I know a lot of people in Petaluma are listening right now, so I'm really hoping that they can see through this and see through all the school's excuses and just see the underlying issue that their children in schools are being sexually assaulted and nobody's doing anything about it. And I'm hoping that they respond accordingly in the upcoming school board elections, and I'm hoping that they can email the Title IX coordinator, Dave Rose, and tell him that this is not okay. Email the superintendent, Gary Callahan. And yeah, we need the people of Petaluma to be active in this issue.
Okay, I'm going to look at some of so I totally have some questions here. Finn, let's see. Well, and so I guess one of the questions that people are asking is that how then can we be proactive about the administration? So we know the school board is up for re-election, but they don't necessarily dictate the actual administration of the schools. They definitely can affect the overall culture and how that's looked at. But maybe the better question is, one, how do we hold the administration accountable first? And then two, if you were an administrator in that capacity, how would you have reacted? So there's kind of two questions.
So the first thing, I just want to briefly explain how it works so people know. So the school board appoints the superintendent, and the superintendent reports to the school board. And then everybody under the superintendent, so the administration reports to him, and the assistant superintendent, who is also the Title IX coordinator. So I don't completely blame the administration because they're kind of at the lower end of the totem pole. I don't really think it was their fault. I think it's the higher up people's fault. So if the people of Petaluma talk to the school board, and they should also know that every perpetrator gets brought before the school board for discipline, unless, in my case, the Title IX coordinator refuses to even bring it up as an issue. So if they talk to the school board or pay a lot of attention to the elections, then that's how we can get that change to kind of funnel down. And then second, if I was an administrator, well, for one, I don't know to what extent the administrators were bossed around by the people above them, but I wouldn't have cut the mic. They knew me, and they knew I wouldn't name names or get them in legal trouble. So I just wouldn't have cut it. I would just let it go.
Yeah, well, and I guess and even prior to the speech, I know that in public schools that administrators and teachers are, very spread and I'm kind of shocked by, it's never an easy situation, but I'm kind of shocked that they were trying to do such extreme damage control
Yeah.
for one reason or the other. in order to do this. So I just couldn't even see myself as a school administrator being in that position of saying, like, you can't speak. I'm just shocked in 2018 that we're having to hear stories about school administration going to people and saying, you can't say something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, we don't want you to drop F-bombs and, say nasty things, but being able to not, like, just tell part of your story, that's actually really shocking to me. And it's reminiscent of when I was in high school and feeling like I didn't have a voice and I couldn't rock the boat.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was really active. People knew who I was, so I felt like I couldn't say anything. And so now we're up against going from not being able to say something because you don't want to rock the boat to not being able to say something because it rocks their boat.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, we haven't seen things go too far. So, with regard to that, so we know that school board's up for not the whole school board.
Mm-hmm.
If you contact our amazing Claire at the city clerk's office, she can provide you with every bit of information you need about anyone running for office, and she answers like that. So mad props. If you're looking to figure out who's running, what seats are vacant for all of the office, all levels of office. So do you think, so we talked a lot about that, but as a Petaluma resident, do you think that there's other issues that are going on in the city? And again, I know it's reflective of the broader national context, but because we are coming up on a local election, do you think there are other issues that are kind of fueling this fire within Petaluma or Sonoma County that need to be addressed outside of the strictly, like, school board context? Like, are there other issues that could be addressed that will kind of help shift this overall culture?
Well, this sexual harassment and stuff is obviously not limited to schools. I know a lot of people that happens in the workplace. So that's a bigger issue, but also there is an issue of racial discrimination, and I've seen this in Petaluma High School. The statistic is 1 year school officials suspended or expelled 33% of the African American students. So racial discrimination is also a big issue in Petaluma.
Yes, and it always has been, which is why, again, it's really interesting that we saw the same thing. I mean, it's a national trend.
Yeah.
But it is more remarkable in certain areas based on the stats. So, okay, let me see if I have any other questions before I just keep asking questions. Everyone's just saying, yeah, if you want to know every single person that's running, you can contact the city clerk's office, and they're very good about it. Okay. All right. So we got about 10 minutes. So, in closing, I think you pretty much shared everything about kind of the speech and the process and what's happening. So, if there's just any ending message you have to, you're going to go off to college, I don't know if you're going to be a permanent resident here and vote here, but what is your parting ways for the captive city of Petaluma that is getting all ready for all of the elections before parting ways?
Well, you've shown, me and other people in my class, you've shown the kids aren't afraid to speak up. And if the kids tell you what's wrong, then the adults need to follow through when they vote.
There it is, just mic drop. Like I always say, we always try to say that the youth are the leaders of the future. And I always remind that they are not leaders of the future. They have the answers now, and they're leaders now. So I'm going to close up by saying that, again, you're listening to DG the 30-something, State of the Union. I'm here with Lulabel today. I start next Tuesday the candidate interviews. I am doing all the mayoral candidates and the city council candidates. So you can tune in here to see the actual schedule. Please check the calendar at kpca.fm. On those shows, I will be accepting questions via Facebook if you're watching the video, as well as email and over the phone lines. The phone questions and all the questions will be screened by someone in studio and passed along to me. So I'm really excited to do those. And please also check the schedule for other shows that will be interviewing various different people. I really want to be able to do school board, but I have only so much time in my day as a full-time employee. So please check in, and if you are interested in interviewing school board candidates or having a show, it is a 100% volunteer, and you can come down and become a member of Petaluma Community Access, and you can be right here in my seat doing any kind of show you like. So if I don't have any more questions from the audience, I am going to close out. Last call, last call. I think we've got all of our last words in. Please go out and vote. This is an incredibly important election. We have very, very low show-outs, even worse than the national elections in these, non-presidential elections. So please go out and vote. Please register. The state of California has changed the laws. It's really easy to vote here. It's really easy to register here. So please do those things and double check that you're registered in the city of Petaluma. If you live in the city of Petaluma, if that is the ballot you want, I think that is the done of my vote spiel, but please, 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 please stay involved. Tune into my show if you want to hear from the candidates. And, get involved. Contact your city clerk. She'll give you all the information you want to know. Thank you so much for tuning in to DG the 30-something State of the Union. You are listening to KPCALP 103.3, and of course you can always live stream at kpca.fm. I'll be seeing you next week. I don't hear the automation. Wait, it was supposed to be like... Cool. Sorry.